In March of 1922, the Hinterkaifeck farmstead sat isolated in the Bavarian countryside. Tucked behind dense, dark woods, it was geographically severed from the rest of the world, a place to disappear without a single witness. That month, the patriarch, Andreas Gruber, discovered a Munich newspaper sitting on his porch. No one in the family had bought it, the local postman hadn't delivered it, and none of the neighbors in the small village subscribed to it. Days later, a fresh layer of snow revealed a set of singular footprints emerging from the forest and leading directly to the machine room. There were no return tracks leading back to the woods. The family's previous maid had already fled the property 6 months earlier, terrified by the sounds of muffled voices and rhythmic pacing echoing from the attic. These anomalies suggest an intruder had established a foothold inside the house long before the violence began, watching the family from the shadows of their own home. On March 31st, that intruder finally struck. The victims included Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her 7-year-old daughter. The tragedy also claimed the lives of the new maid, Maria, who had arrived only hours prior, and 2-year-old Josef. The Grubers lived in a state of social exile. Andreas was known for his abusive nature, and a 1915 conviction for an incestuous relationship with his daughter Victoria had permanently alienated the family from the surrounding community. Late that evening, the 4 older family members were lured out of the house and into the barn one by one. Each was killed with a family-owned mattock, a heavy agricultural tool designed for digging and chopping. The architectural design of the farmstead meant the barn was connected to the living quarters through an indoor stable. This allowed the killer to creep into the house to murder the maid and the toddler in their beds, without ever stepping foot outside. The integrated layout of the buildings and the family's total isolation from their neighbors created a tactical vacuum where a murderer could operate for hours without being detected. After the slaughter, the killer remained on the farm for 3 days. They lit the fireplace, fed the cattle, and ate food from the kitchen while the 6 victims lay nearby. It wasn't until April 4th that neighbors finally visited the property to investigate why the family had missed Sunday church and why the mail was piling up at the local office. Before the Munich police arrived, the crime scene was completely overrun by curious locals. Villagers moved the bodies, handled the evidence, and cooked meals in the kitchen, effectively destroying any trace evidence or fingerprints left by the perpetrator. This total contamination of the farmstead left early forensic investigators with no physical clues, ensuring the murderer's identity would remain a matter of speculation rather than science. In 1922 Germany, the Weimar Republic collapsed under hyperinflation. Currency lost value so quickly that families burned literal stacks of paper banknotes in their stoves. In the streets, children used blocks of bundled cash as building materials. The economy had evaporated, leaving a desperate and starving population. This environment birthed the Freikorps, violent paramilitary units of World War I veterans who patrolled the countryside with armored vehicles marked by skull and crossbones insignias. Detectives suspected 2 Freikorps members, Adolf and Anton Gump, of the killings. A foreign penknife was found in the barn hay. Decades later, their sister allegedly confessed on her deathbed that the brothers were responsible. However, when police searched the farmhouse, they found large sums of cash and valuables completely untouched. Desperate mercenaries would have taken the money. The fact that the fortune was left behind suggests the motive was personal, not financial. The autopsies revealed evidence of overkill, an extreme level of violence directed at the victims' faces and skulls that went far beyond what was necessary to kill them. This typically points to a perpetrator with a deep-seated personal rage. This led investigators to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and Victoria's former lover. He was the rumored father of the toddler, Joseph, a claim that connected him directly to the family's internal scandals. Schlittenbauer had clear motives. He was allegedly dodging child support demands and held a long-term grudge against Andreas Gruber, who had interfered in his relationship with Victoria. During the discovery of the bodies, his behavior was alarming. He used a house key, walked into the crime scene alone, and handled the corpses without distress. Years later, he told a local man that the murderer had been unable to bury the family because the ground was frozen solid. It was a specific observation about the soil conditions during the weekend of the murders, a detail only someone present on the farm at that time would likely know. In 1923, as workers demolished the farmstead, they pulled back the attic insulation. Tucked deep within the floorboards, they found the missing mattock, its heavy iron head still caked in dried blood. The location of the weapon confirmed the earlier reports of phantom footsteps in the ceiling. The killer had occupied the space directly above the victims' heads, using the attic as a hidden vantage point to observe the household's routines. Detectives sent the victims' skulls to Munich for analysis, but the physical evidence was permanently lost during the Allied bombing raids of World War II. Without the remains, the case effectively ceased to exist as a forensic investigation. 6 people were slaughtered on a farm that had become its own island, separated from the community by a history of scandal and abuse. The murderer eventually walked back into the woods, leaving behind a case file that would go cold as the evidence vanished into the history of another war.